remind me at the close when the bell rings to hand out the sheet for the next week's. I don't want you to have it now because I don't want anybody looking ahead for the future. We'll do that at the end. This morning, we're continuing our look at the nature of God. What is God like? And it doesn't matter what we think or suppose, but it matters how He reveals Himself to us. And for me, that's important because those of us who have a serious relationship with God need to view Him correctly. Because sometimes we have a twisted view of God, and sometimes, at least in the past, there's been a lot of emphasis on God is watching us to walk down the straight and narrow, and if we slip up one way, He'll get us. And you better act right, because God is going to get you if you don't do everything perfectly correct. Now, God never overlooks evil. And God, as we have seen many instances already, God absolutely punishes willful disobedience and punishes evil. But what about the rest of us that struggle every day to follow Him? Maybe struggle is not a good word, but we strive, we want to, and yet we know we don't quite measure up at times. How does God look at that? Last week we looked at the top half of this page about some extenuating circumstances that God made allowances for. And we think, you mean God is reasonable? I think so. Does God know about us? I think so. Last week we saw that in the Old Testament, He had designated this great feast of Passover to be on a certain month, a certain day. And yet, the very next year after He did that, after the Exodus from Egypt, to remember the Passover plague, they celebrated the Passover, and there were some people that were ceremoniously unclean, meaning they were not purified to go to the Passover meal and all that, because they had to have a funeral recently. And as we said, they didn't know about diseases, and God's rules were if you had to bury a person, it could have been a communicable disease. So after a funeral, everybody's unclean for a week. Make sure you don't have any breaking out of some disease that they may have had. So after 7 days, then you can purify yourself, and then you're ceremonial clean to come back and take Passover and all that. So this second year, when Passover came around, there were a lot of people that were unclean, couldn't take Passover. God says that's all right. Moses said, I will talk to God and see what God says. And God says, that's okay. If you're unclean, you can just do it on the second month. Not the first month that's prescribed, but I'll let you do it a month later and everything's okay. Sure enough, we saw another time, some 700 years later, where the people of Israel had deserted God and now come back. They started temple worship again, cleaned it up, and they were so excited that they offered the Passover again, the second month of the year, not the first month. And not only that, there were so many people that were unclean that they couldn't eat Passover. And this is what the king of Israel prays. He says, may the Lord, who is good, pardon everyone who sets their heart on seeking God, the Lord, the God of their ancestors, even if they are not clean, according to the rules of the sanctuary. And the Lord heard his prayer and forgave the people. Here was a time that God made an exception for this extenuating circumstance based on what? People who had set their hearts on seeking God. God seems to honor all attempts to seek Him. And sometimes things don't work out that we get it all right. But he says that's the key, is our hearts seeking him. All right. The bottom half of this sheet is the New Testament. What does Jesus say about making an allowance for something that we may think is pretty well set in stone? All right. We have a situation. This is Mark chapter 2, if you want to turn there. If not, I'll read it as we go. I've got so many bookmarks here, and they fall out, and then I'm left hanging. Mark chapter 2, Jesus is in a confrontational situation with the very, very strict Pharisees. And the situation is that the Pharisees, were watching in the bushes any time they could catch Jesus in a bind. If they could catch Jesus in a contradiction, or catch Jesus doing something that was against the old law, doing something that was against their rules, they were going to try to get Jesus out of the picture, because he was a threat to their power. He was a threat to the Pharisees in their control of the people. And so the situation here in Mark chapter 2 is the Sabbath day. Okay? We know the Sabbath day, that was their holy day. That was the seventh day. That was their Saturday. And we remember, even in the Ten Commandments, God says, you shall remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, or your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. That was one of the Ten Commandments. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. It's not just a regular common day that we might, give a nod to God and go on. He says, don't work. You, your servants, sons or daughters, whoever, you don't work. You don't do work on the Sabbath. You need to keep it holy. All right, by the time of Jesus' day now, many years later, the good Jews who were bound up in legal thinking, we call it this legalistic way of thinking, had made up on their own how they should keep the Sabbath holy. All right, they just didn't leave it up to us common folks to think, well, I think I can, respect God and keep the Sabbath holy with my own senses. But they came up with, I think it was close to something like 460 rules about what you could and could not do on the Sabbath day. And if you went over the line, that was called work. And boy, if you did too much work, then that was a violation of God's Ten Commandments, and that's not good. Some of them we've probably heard about. We all have to eat on a Sabbath. So I'm going to gather some little firewood sticks to, cook my meal with. But they had a number of sticks you could gather, because if you gathered more than that, that means you were gathering for tomorrow or the next day, and that was work. So you could only gather so many sticks for your meal. On and on and on and on. Hundreds of little rules about what was work and what wasn't work. One of the things that they were not supposed to do was to harvest, to work on the Sabbath day. And even during harvest, if you ever know anything about farmers, we only get paid once or twice or 3 times a year, and that's at harvest time. And when the crop is ready, it's work, 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 go, go, go to get it in before windstorm, hail, whatever destroys the crop. And that happens. Believe me, it happens. And so harvest time is a stressful time. It's all hands on deck. And God says, no, even during harvest, you take off on the Sabbath and you rest. And the rule actually in the Mosaic Law was if you're hungry and you need some grain, you can rub your own grain out in your hands, eat enough for the daily meal, but you don't take a sickle or a scythe to harvest on the Sabbath. That's work. But what you need for sustenance, what you need for your daily bread, that's okay. Now, this little section here, Mark 2, beginning with verse 23, Jesus and his disciples are on the Sabbath, walking along a path, and the harvest is ready, the grain is ready, just like it is right now. And this is wheat or barley. Maybe your older versions, the King James would call it corn. Well, that was their general word for grain back in those days, but it wasn't ear corn like we know. It was the grain, the barley or the wheat. And as you know, they would take the heads, and you could rub it together and blow out the chaff and eat the grains. And that's what Jesus and his disciples were doing. And the Pharisees called them and said, "What on earth are you doing? You're working." I'll read verse 23 of Mark chapter 2. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And he answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for the priest to eat. And he also gave some to his companions." Then he said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." All right, let's think about this. What on earth is Jesus talking about? They get caught taking enough grains to eat on for their daily meal, and they were accused of working on the Sabbath. And Jesus says, "Don't you know about our King David, the great king we all revere?" And the story is one that we have recorded in the Old Testament, where David and his men were out on a Sabbath, and they'd run out of food, couldn't find any, so they went to the priest there at the tabernacle. And according to all the Old Testament rules, the priests baked 12 loaves of bread, put it on the little altar there, and it was there for the week. And at the end of the week, they would bake another set of 12 loaves, and then they would eat the old bread. The old bread, week-old bread, they ate it after the week was over. This was the priests. King David comes up to the priests and says, "Do you have anything to eat?" And they said, "All we have is this consecrated 12 loaves, and we bake 12 new loaves for the week coming up, so these 12 loaves are ready for us to eat as priests, but if you need it, I guess it's okay." So the priest gave David and his soldiers this consecrated bread that was really just meant for the priest. David and his soldiers ate it. So this is what Jesus was referring to here. In situations that are sort of extenuating, there's things that happen in God's plan that we have to make adjustments for. And Jesus is implying, look, we're just eating what we need, just like David did. So this is not a problem. And he says, really, even the Son of Man, though, is Lord of the Sabbath, meaning him. And we say, well, why doesn't he call himself the Son of God rather than the Son of Man? If he went around everywhere saying, the Son of God says this, the Son of God says that, it would be quite offensive to a lot of people, because they said, no, God doesn't have a son like that, because we know who his mother and dad are. But instead, he calls himself the Son of Man, which is a code word from the Old Testament for the coming Messiah. And he says, the Son of Man, meaning him, is the Lord of the Sabbath. I rule the Sabbath. I'm over the Sabbath. I have more authority over the Sabbath because I'm God's Son. But the previous statement in verse 27 is the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And we say, what on earth does that mean? It means that God's gift to man was the Sabbath as a blessing. It's not a burden. It's not a burden of a bunch of laws just to see if man can keep it. Did God dream up the Sabbath so that he could have a whole bunch of rules, and then he created man just so man could see if he could keep all the rules of the Sabbath? And the answer, of course, is that God's gift is a blessing to us, and it's not to be a burden as the Pharisees were making it. 460 some odd rules about how to keep the Sabbath. That was their focus. And Jesus turns it upside down and says, look, the Sabbath was made to bless man. And you have turned it over so that man is just trying to keep your Sabbath rules. And so I think about this, and there's comparisons, a contrast between these two views. The Pharisees, rule after rule to keep. The Sabbath, though, is a blessing from God. And I don't know, I've listed several here, back and forth. On one hand, they can make up the rules for their own justification to make sure everybody follows our rules. But yet, on the other hand, the Sabbath is to benefit man. It's to benefit humanity. It wasn't just made up for some rules. Rule keeping focuses on the external, right? External. How many sticks did I pick up today? Oh, did I get one too many? I better hide it so I don't get in trouble. Rules are external. On the other hand, a Sabbath of rest and worship focuses on God and His holiness. And we become holy as we take on God's nature. The Pharisee says, well, you're holy if you keep my rules. And that's not right at all. Rule keeping always implies tension, right? Did I do enough? Did I get it right? Did I follow the P's and Q's? Did I take too many steps? Did I get too many sticks? It's tension. Did I go too fast? But rest and worship. God said in the Ten Commandments, you need to have a day of rest because I did after creation. I rested on the seventh day. Of course, we know that God was not tired on the seventh day. But that was his figure of speech to us, that he ended creation. It was glorious. He declared it wonderful, very good. And the consummation day was the Sabbath to say it's completed. He says, keep a day of the week to remember me as creator and rest just like I did. And we could go on, and we could see how the physical laws of do's and don'ts for the Sabbath have little to do with our spiritual needs of honoring the Sabbath and keeping it holy. So that's what we mean or what Jesus means when he said the Sabbath was made for man. Man was not made for the Sabbath. All right. We see this and we think, well, okay, Jesus won this one. But it continues. Before I go to, let me ask, any comment or question on our deal with the Sabbath? Any comment? Sir, yes.
This reminds me, back in the day,
Yeah.
yesteryear, Sunday was reserved.
Yes.
Church had to.
Yes.
There was not anything else running around.
Yes.
The biggest event that went on was fried chicken dinner. That was church.
Yes.
Then along come a man and had wisdom, and he'd been in a blue law, remember the blue law?
Yes. I do.
Set up a bunch of rules to make
Yes.
Sunday more convenient for man rather than for God. And then it turned sour in what we have
Yeah.
today,
Yes.
I think.
Yes. Let's talk about this for a minute. Since Jay brought this up, of yesteryear. To be accurate, we as Christians do not have a Christian Sabbath. We worship on Sunday, but we do not have anything in the New Testament that requires us to, do this or not do this on a Sunday. So we recognize that. We also recognize that in the first century, when Jesus was talking, and after his resurrection, Sunday was a work day because they still took off Sabbath for Saturday. And so some of the early churches met on Sunday. They began to thinking, well, we don't need to worship on Saturday anymore because the new covenant, we worship Jesus, and Jesus arose on the first day of the week, so we need to worship on Sunday. But we have to work on Sunday. So there's some glimpses in the New Testament that some of the assemblies we see are maybe after work on a Sunday night. So, okay, we recognize that, the early Christians may have had to work on Sunday. And then we look at our lives, as Jay said, in the past, and I had written down also blue laws, and I guess everybody can remember blue laws here in Texas. You couldn't sell a lot of stuff on Sunday, and that was good and well-meaning. But there's another term that I remember from childhood. Driving down the road and somebody's in front of you and they're driving slow and they're looking around, and somebody says, "Oh, they're just a Sunday driver." What did people do when the cars came out and highways were good? They took a Sunday afternoon drive, right? And so that was the concept of a Sunday driver, just leisurely driving along. And that was our quaint view of Sunday. So how do we deal with this? And as Jay says, now, Walmart's open, everybody's shopping, everybody's doing, I don't know, they're even playing ball out here on the fields, I guess, to some degree on Sundays and all like that. And we come home and turn on the TV and watch the football games or whatever. And so that's a question for all of us to answer, all of us to think about, all of us to, I wouldn't say struggle with, but think about. God calls us to remember Him and worship, and we do. And yes, we're not required to, on Sunday, to pull the curtains and turn off the lights and hide for a whole day. And yet, it's not good for us to just have a normal day. Oh yeah, this is Sunday. Oh yeah, but that's right, I got to go to church at 10. Okay, I'll go to church at 10, and then it's good if we can pause. First of all, of course, for worship and for rest and for family and for rejuvenation intentionally. And that's our word. not that it just happens, yeah, Sunday happens, but no, intentionally. And that's everybody that's here came here intentionally, right? It just didn't happen. We made a point to come here, and that's good. God honors that. And so how else do we do? What else do we do? That's up to our struggle, and I'm open to suggestions on how we make Sunday an intentional day of rest and worship. And Jay, thank you for setting it off. How do we do this better? Dr. May.
Why is Walmart open on Sunday? Because I go and buy stuff.
Correct.
And you see, the Bible is really a public health book. If you look at Leviticus, there's a lot of rules.
Yes.
But they have to do with public health. Why did God want man to rest today? Because he knew the man he created couldn't work 7 days
Yes.
a week, 12 months a year. He couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Jesus focuses on don't be anxious.
Yeah.
We now have good medical studies that tell you that anxiety kills you.
Yes.
So what he's trying to tell us is that some of these things are not good for us. As human beings,
Yes.
we can't work 7
Yes.
days a week.
Yes.
But, you know, you and I are in control of the American economy.
Yeah.
If we don't buy it, they won't sell it. But it's hard. You know, why now? In 1780, we could do that.
Yeah.
Because everybody was of a Judeo-Christian background.
Yes.
Now then there's hundreds of different, you know,
Yeah.
but it comes down to a personal choice. Just like, you know, it's one thing to run out of bread and run down to Walmart for a
Yes.
loaf of bread.
Yes.
Another thing to go buy $300 worth of groceries.
That is one of my personal choices that I try not to do commerce on Sunday. Commerce meaning buying and selling transactions and stuff. If I need to get gas, that's fine. If I need a loaf of bread, that's fine. But exactly,
And see, that loaf of bread is just for today, actually.
yes.
You're not buying for the next 6 months.
I feel very uncomfortable, me or of course my wife, with a shopping cart loaded up for the week on a Sunday.
But you hope you don't run into anybody you know.
Okay. Now, let me throw this out for you. You know, prior to modern day America, you know, everybody that worked, worked physically. Washing was physical, cooking was physical, fires and all that stuff, and pots, and everything, and we worked in the fields and we fed the cows and all that. And so, it was obvious that we were resting on the Sabbath. However, today, I can work on a computer all week long. If I work on a computer, a bookkeeper or CPA or attorney, whatever, sit inside and do this. They're not outside harvesting wheat and corn and cotton and hoeing weeds and feeding cows and fixing fence and spraying pastures and all like that I do physically. So here's a CPA that works all day long, bookkeeping, whatever, and so they can work on Sunday afternoon and not make a change at all. But for me, since I'm outside as a farmer every day, I can come in and on Sunday afternoon, I sit at my desk and I pay my bills and do bookkeeping and stuff. See, that's a relief for me. I'm not out in the heat, fixing fence. I'm in here, air conditioning, working at a computer. So even though it would be general, normal, weekly work for a bookkeeper, for me, it's different. So work is different now, so I have to deal with that. And yet, growing up, and I'm sure we were all this way, farmers didn't harvest on Sunday. Even during harvest time, you didn't harvest. And if you did, you always went to church first, And then in the afternoons, you know, you snuck out and did some. So we say, well, you shouldn't work on Sunday. But what is work? Work is a little bit different nowadays than it used to be, just with the physical hard labor that we all did. So anyway, for me, my relaxation on a Sunday afternoon paying bills is another man's work if you're a bookkeeper that you do every day. So anyway, that's a thought.
Neil,
Yes, sir.
the other side of that coin is true too. You may spend all day Sunday worshiping. What do you do the other 6 days of the week? Do you not worship on the other days of the week? Of course not. So if you're a Christian that just worships on Sunday and forgets the other 6 days of the week, you're not much of a Christian.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Well, I'll throw in one more point about the Sabbath.
Okay.
Women didn't work either. That's why they had to get all their cooking and all their fires ready before sundown
Okay.
on Friday, so that Saturday, the women were not cooking or cleaning or anything. But in the modern day interpretation, cooking and preparing food on Sunday was not considered work because nobody thought it was work, but it was work. And I was thinking in the city, everybody was closed except the cafeterias on Sunday. You could definitely go to a cafeteria and eat.
Yes. Yes.
And there are appliances you can buy today, ovens and things, that have a Sabbath setting. So you can set it to go to work for you on Friday evening, and it'll keep your food warm all day long for 24 hours, and it's called the Sabbath setting, if you're following the Jewish pattern.
Neil, one other thing too. What is a computer? It's just a tool.
Yeah.
So the computer to the CPA is the same thing as a tractor to Neil.
Yes. So how do we view our work? You know, my work is your play is my work. You know, you may have been a doctor all week long, come out to your place and cut cedar on Sunday afternoon. Oh, it's relaxing. Boy, cutting cedar is just so relaxing. Get out of that hospital or doctor's office. And for me, I cut cedar in the week. Man, I come in on Sunday afternoon and think, man, that's the last thing I want to do is cut cedar. So, like you say, there's two sides to the views. Yes, sir.
Well, you know, along those lines, I cut a lot of cedar.
Yeah.
When I get through, I can take a scringy little old cedar tree
Yeah.
and I can prune it up, and when I get through with it, it's a beautiful tree.
Yeah.
I prune, you know, I bet I have pruned up 1,000 trees on my ranch. And you know, another misconception is that it's the water, it's the shade that's the danger of cedar.
Yeah.
If you prune the cedar up 5 feet off the ground, grass grows right up to the base of that cedar, just like it does at the base of an oak tree. But again, it's not work for me, it's a creative work for me.
Yes. Yes. Well, so can we turn the clock back to 1960? No. We have Walmart open, we have traffic, commerce, you have all that. So it's reality. And
Well, you see, it's good that we have a God that looks at our heart. He knows where our heart is.
yes,
And he's the guy that's going to judge me and you.
yes, yes. There's a Christian leader that makes the phrase, reality is our friend. You know, we like to live in yesterday. We like to live in the good old days. We like to live how it used to be. But his statement is, reality is our friend. Don't run away from it. And so here we have reality of what we have. Our cultural decline, as bad as it is reality. And we can't run away from it. I was reading a little article this week. Summer's upon us, And the kiddos go off to camp and they do this and that and that. And the writer said, do you remember as kids in summer, you know, we didn't have these little things that we look at all day long, and the kiddos are glued to, either to their ear or to their face. We didn't have that. And there's no way to turn the clock back for our kiddos to have he was calling it a summer without screens, these little screens. A summer without screens. He was saying there are camps you can go to, send your kids to camp that bans all screens. You have to think, you have to play ball, you have to draw pictures, you have to go swimming, you have to, like we used to do, without the screens, and chit-chatting with their little friends and sending pictures and all that stuff. There are camps, there's organizations that are promoting screenless camps and days for kiddos. And so we think that's an attempt at going back to the good old days. I applaud that, I appreciate that. And I also say, parents, with our youngsters, you have got to stay on top of that. And free access to these little things, it's awful. But that's reality. That's reality, that's life.